In an advanced algebra class, the Unit 1 test scores were normally distributed with a mean of 78 and a standard deviation of 11 points. So we have 4 questions here. Question A says Tyler got an 82. What is his z-score, and what percent of the class did worse than Tyler? So before we get into this, I want to just kind of give a quick refresher. So when you find a z-score, what you're actually finding is a more detailed standard deviation. So instead of just finding if it's 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations away, we're finding out if it's 1.56 standard deviations above the mean, or maybe it's 2.07 standard deviations to the left of the mean. So now it doesn't have to be all whole numbers. We can find any standard deviation. That's basically all a z-score is. Okay. And then the other thing you need to remember about z-scores is whatever the z-score is. So let's say that this is the mean right here. And then we figure out that the z-score is up here. So it's above the mean. So here's your mean, here's your z-score. The percentage that we are going to get by using that z-score table is always going to give you the percentage below the z-score. So anytime that you're looking for something below that z-score, you can use the exact percentage that you find on that table. If you're ever looking for anything above the z-score, you have to take the table percentage and subtract it from 100. So you're taking everything and subtracting the part that you don't want so that you're left with the part that you do want. All right, so let's talk about question A. So Tyler got an 82. 2 questions. What is his z-score, and then what percent of the class did worse? So first let's figure out the z-score. Remember that the z-score is a formula, and this formula will be given to you. It's not something you have to have memorized. So you take the value that you're given minus the mean and divide it by the standard deviation. So the value for the z-score for Tyler's score would be 82 minus the mean, which is 78, divided by the standard deviation, which is 11. And that tells you that information in the problem. So you put this into your calculator. And I want to show you one time on the calculator just so that we don't have any mistakes, because this would be a really easy mistake to make. So just want to show you really quick. There are 2 ways to do this. Actually 3 ways. The first way is to take 82 minus 78, which is the numerator of our fraction, press enter, and then divide it by 11. Okay, so that is going to be our z-score, is 0.36. Remember, we always do 2 decimal places. Another correct way would be to do in parentheses 82 minus 78, close your parentheses, and then divide by 11. So you're doing it all in one step. It's just really important that you tell the calculator that 82 minus 78 goes together in the numerator. I'll show you why this is important. If you just did 82 minus 78 divided by 11, your calculator is going to follow order of operations. So it's going to do 78 divided by 11, and then it's going to do 82 minus that number. So you see how you get a totally different number. And if you did this, you would notice like 74.991 is a ridiculous z-score. It doesn't go up that high. So you'd know you made a mistake. And then the last way to do it is if you do alpha y equals and you put it in as a fraction. So you can do 82 minus 78 and then divide it by 11. The only thing about doing that is, as you notice, your answer comes back as a fraction. So then you would have to do 4 divided by 11. So I would not recommend this way. It takes more work. I would either recommend doing it the first way we did it, where you subtract your numbers, then divide by 11, or use parentheses. So that was a really long way of saying that our z-score is 0.36. So let's write that down, 0.36. So that's our z-score. That answers that first question. And then the second question is, what percent of the class did worse than Tyler? So if you go back to my little picture over here, so this is Tyler. I'm putting another purple circle around that Z. We want to know who did worse. Worse would be to the left. So that means whatever percentage I find on my z-score table is the percentage that will be the answer. So let's go to the z-score table and we'll find 0.36. Remember that when you're looking at the z-score table, there's a positive and a negative side, so we need to make sure we're looking at the positive side. All right, so 0.36. So 0.3 is right here, and 0.06 is up here. So I need to find the number where those 2 things match. So here's 0.3, and then if I go right here, that's where the 2 numbers meet. So it's going to be 0.6406. So let's go back here and write that down. So it's 0.6406, but that's a decimal and we want a percentage. And remember, the way to transfer that into a percentage is just by moving the decimal point over twice. So my final answer would be 64.06%. So that means that 64% of the class did worse than Tyler. Question B, Carlos got a 66. What percent of the class did better than Carlos? So we still need to figure out the z-score, even though it didn't explicitly ask us to do that. But we need the z-score to be able to find the percentage. And then notice that it asks who did better than Carlos. So let's say that this z here is Carlos. We need to know the percentage above. So this is one where we're going to have to find the percentage and then subtract from 100. All right, so let's first find the z-score. So his score was 66 minus the mean divided by standard deviation. So you set it up the exact same way. You're just replacing the value of 66. When you put this in your calculator, and I'm not going to go through that all again, you get negative 1.09. So now we're going to go back to our z-score table, and we're going to find out what the percentage is for negative 1.09. So remember that you have to be careful. This is the positive side of the z-score chart, so we need to go to the second page where we have the negative numbers. So I need to find negative 1.0 on the left, and then I'm going to scroll back up for just a second. 0.09 is all the way to the right. So I'm going to go back down. Here's negative 1.0, and then all the way to the right is 0.1379. So I know that the percent is 0.1379 or 13.79%. But remember that that is not our final answer. That is the amount of people, or the percentage of people who did worse than Carlos, and we want the percentage that did better. So we're going to take 100, which is everybody, and then we're going to subtract it from our, we're going to subtract our percentage from that, and that will give us our final answer. So I'm going to take 100 and I'm going to subtract 13.79. And when you do that, you end up with 86.21. So 86.21% did better than Carlos on this test. Part C, it's asking us to calculate two separate z-scores. So this is not so bad. So I'm going to kind of do my notation differently. I'm going to put z of 60 and then z of 100. And that way I can keep them straight, which one is which. So I'm going to do that formula twice. For the first one, I'll replace my x with 60, and then the mean and standard deviation don't change. And when I do my calculations, I get negative 1.64. And then if I do z for 100, I plug it into my formula, and when you put it in your calculator, you're going to get you're going to get 2, just plain 2. Okay, so I have my z-scores, and then part D is asking me to use those z-scores. It says what percent of the class passed the test, which means got a score between 60 and 100, so at least a 60. So this is one of those tricky ones where I'm going to have to figure out what is between. So I'm going to try to draw another picture. Hopefully I won't make it worse. All right, so we have our z-scores. Oops, how did that change back to orange? We have our z-scores. I know that somebody who got a 60 would be here at negative 1.64. And then somebody who got a 100 would be way over here with a standard deviation of 2. And I'm looking to see what percentage is in between those two values. Remember that when you do a z-score, it tells you the percent below that value. So if I find the z-score for if I find the percentage that goes with negative 1.64, that's going to be this percent that I just highlighted in yellow. If I find the percentage for a z-score of 2, it's going to give me everything that is below 2. So you'll notice that this section right here, this section right here got highlighted twice. So what I'm going to do is take the green section, which would be the percentage for a z-score that is 2, and I'm going to subtract the part that was originally yellow over here. If I subtract this part, I'll be left with just the green part that's in between those two black lines. So I have to take my two z-scores and figure out what the percentages are, and then I will subtract the bigger one minus the smaller one, and we'll be good to go. So let's first figure out the percentage that goes with a z-score of 2. So I'm going to go to my z-score table, go to my positive side, and I need to find 2, exactly 2. So here's 2.0, and then if you look at the top of this column, it says 0.00. So that would just be 2.00. So it's not 0.9772. So let's go back and write this down. So this would be 0.9772 or 97.72%. And then I need to do the same thing for a z-score of negative 1.64. So I'm going to go back to my z-score table. I'm going to go to the negative side. Okay, so here's negative 1.6, and then the 0.04 is right here in the middle. So it's actually the fifth column. So here's negative 1.6, and then the fifth column would be right here, so 0.0505. So this is 0.0505, which is actually 5.05%. So my final answer, and then we'll be completely done. All I have to do is take my two percentages and subtract them, and I always want to subtract the bigger percent minus the smaller percent. So if I subtract those 2%, I get 92.67%. So that's our final answer for Part D. That means that 92.67% of the class passed or got a score between a 60 and 100.